Hey folks, it's Jim. I'm going to try and do a video. I'm going to try and make this fast. The piece of information that I'm going to get out on this video is that the Chinese people have savings of $22 trillion. That's savings, folks, okay? That's shocking when you think about it. Americans have 800 billion in savings. The Chinese people, who are supposedly underpaid and less privileged than us and so on and so forth, have $22 trillion in savings. The people of China, not the government, the people of China have $22 trillion in savings. Now that sounds like a lot, but let's look at it in other ways and let's explore what's happening here and why I'm telling you those cities are being made to lure the best and brightest of the world to Chinese economics and China's economy, and where you're going to have a much better chance of success to accumulate wealth, if you will, as America once was. China, again, as I've said before, is playing the exact same playbook the United States did to become the economic power of the world. China's playing that same book, exactly, play by play. Okay, so we only have 800 billion in savings, where the Chinese people, who are supposedly underpaid and all that, have 22 trillion in savings. But that's not the whole story. That $22 trillion is only half of what the Chinese per capita savings really is. You see, because they only save in savings accounts half of what they actually save off their income. The average Chinese citizen saves 40% of their income. Let me repeat that. The average Chinese citizen saves 40% of his or her income. Okay? Why can they do that? Because their cost of living is so low. For everybody who thinks that the Chinese are so underpaid and da-da-da-da-da, no. Economically, they're not. They're doing quite well, far better than Americans. Okay? And I want you to know and understand that. And part of the reason is we pay $26,000 for the average new vehicle. They pay $3,500. Does that sound kind of comparable to our national debt ratios as well? Can you see the fundamental economic principles in play here of how the Chinese are much better shaped than we are in America as Americans? And it shows right in savings rates. 800 billion for American savings, and some would contest and argue that, okay, well, we don't save because it's not useful to save. Hogwash. Can the average American person save 40% of their income? The answer is no, absolutely not, and hell no. The average American citizen is broke, getting by month to month, as you know. And Obamacare has done nothing more but put another extraordinary burden on what little income freedom that Americans did have has been eaten up in the middle income areas. And you know that if you're a middle class income person and you have to pay health insurance for you, yourself, and a child. You realize how much it's consuming of your income. Now, if you're lucky enough to be a part of a corporation that pays all that, well, good for you. But you're one of the very few, because most of you know the average citizen isn't getting those benefits. They're paying a monthly stipend into that, correct? They're paying for their own health insurance now through their income, okay? So, $22 trillion in savings, that's the basis of this video. I want you to know and understand that. In other words, the Chinese could pay off their national debt with 1/3 of their savings accounts. That doesn't include their investment accounts, which are bigger than that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, and here's another factor I want to get in this video, so you know and understand how important it is to get this piece of information about the Chinese citizens versus American citizens, okay? If the yuan, or the renminbi, were to be allowed to float to its equilibrium with the rest of the world's currencies, which the Chinese keep it down, 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 okay, if it were to allow to float to its natural equilibrium and that currency purchasing power were to even go higher, that means they would have about $32 to $33 trillion in savings power. Do you understand that? In equivalence, all right? In dollars. This is in dollars, not yuan, renminbi, okay? So let me read you a caption. This comes from the Mises Institute. This is an article called Chinese Savings versus America's Spending. It was written by a Chinese man named Peter Wang. The Mises Institute has some of the world's best and brightest mathematical minds in it, and these are extremely intelligent people, folks. Okay, so let me read you the article. Earlier this month, the IMF released a new report noting that via purchasing power parity, PPP, which is a number all central banks use to measure economies, right? It's one number. China's GDP in 2014 is estimated at $17.6 trillion, surpassing the US's $17.4 trillion to become the world's largest economy via PPP, okay? Not GDP, okay? MarketWatch subsequently published a recent article titled, "It's Official, America is Now Number 2." Okay, the article points out that since 1869, America has always been number 1. Well, now, in this moment, China has surpassed us with regards to PPP, or purchasing power. And where does that come from? Well, the Chinese people save 40% of their total income. They save that much. They save in savings, which is that 22 trillion I talked to you about. That's savings. Half of that 40% is that 22 trillion. The other half has been invested in markets that have gone up, 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 and away. And real estate investments around the world, and mining investments, and water districts, and other things that have gone up, 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 and away. As you've watched all of the world markets climb, even though we're in a near recession economy, the stock markets are still climbing, right? Which ought to tell you logically we're in a bubble. The fact of the matter is, the Chinese people are far better off with regards to saving and cost of living ratios than Americans could ever be or will ever be again, until this whole thing falls apart and we rebuild it with common sense. Okay, and part of that is because the Chinese cost of living is so low. And it goes back to the base premise of this whole series, which is how are the Chinese going to lure the best, brightest, and most intelligent and productive people of the world to China in these cities? It's right there. If you could go to China and save 50% of your income, let's say, because you're going to get paid more than the average Chinese citizen doing the same work to import you and your creativity. If you could do that, imagine how wealthy you'd be in 10 years, right? And what purchasing power you would have. But let's go back to the other point. By purchasing power, the Chinese, with a depressed yuan, have surpassed the U.S. with regards to PPP. Imagine if they take the cap off the yuan, holding it down so their exports remain high, right? If they take the cap off the yuan and let it float to its nominal rate as compared to the rest of the world's currencies, it would rise about 30% from here easily, as most economists would tell you. So that would add 30% more to the Chinese people's wealth because they're holding yuan renminbi, right? So can you see that? Whereas the dollar isn't going to rise like that. While it's had a good rise against the rest of the world's currencies, it hasn't risen much against the yuan, right? And that's because the Chinese government holds the yuan down, all right? And the American government has tried to hold the dollar down too, where there's been a massive flight to safety. We have to look also at the gold and silver. If you go watch the video that I posted from another channel on my, in between all these videos, you'll see what China's doing with regards to gold and silver, okay? And it's frightening. They're buying up gold and silver mines around the world. They're investing in them, holding majority shares in some. So it's not only that they're the #1 world's gold producer internally and silver producer internally, and none of that leaves the Chinese state, by the way. None of that gold they're producing and silver leaves that country. It stays there, okay? So, you know, that's what's the difference is. The Chinese people are buying up real assets around the world that are gaining value, to water districts, to the best real estate in the world, to mining stock shares, right? And just look all this stuff up for yourself. But if the cap were to be taken off of the Chinese yuan, renminbi, if you will, it would go up about 30%, which would increase their purchase power. Do you understand that? It would make them, that 22 trillion would turn to about, in dollar equivalency, 33 trillion. Okay? So think about that. The average American can barely save anything, and it shows by our $800 billion savings rate. And they say, well, that's because interest rates are so low. Well, that's how desperate our so-called advanced economies are as compared to China. We don't get interest for putting money in the bank anymore because they're trying to get you to spend everything to keep this Keynesian idiocy afloat. And that's the only way it can be done, is if you continue to consume. And some might ask, well, if our economies are so great and this and that, and they're pointing out how much better we are than China, where's all the money? Well, it's not in the average American citizen's hands, because obviously they're broke, living month to month, barely getting by, right? A few, yes, are getting ahead and economically successful, but that's how China's going to lure the best and brightest to China, because anybody who goes there could be economically successful and viable and save 40 to 50% of their income and still live decently in China, because the cost of living is so low. Again, automobile, $26,000 in the United States. In China, $3,500. Do you see the difference? They don't have to make as much money as us to save a ton, okay? Well, where is all this money going? Well, who rules your government? It's not you anymore. You get to vote on a few things, but let's face it, the reality of it is we're in a corporatocracy now, and you know that. Corporations have been ruling, dominating our government, and their lobbyists are writing the bills that our Congress and Senate approve because they can't even read them anymore. So companies like Apple Computer, yes, all you Apple lovers, Apple has $200 billion in cash. That's where all the savings is going, into corporations. And they're buying back their own stock and doing other things with it. And that's why our stock market continues to climb, even though it's in a bubble, right? Because they have no place else to put all this money that they're accumulating, the real wealth that they're accumulating, which Americans can no longer accumulate because they're barely getting by month to month. We're lucky if the average American who's working, which is only less than half the population, by the way, I might add, is maybe, if they're lucky, can save 5 or 10% a month. That would be a really good economic base for an American citizen in this current Keynesian insanity, all right? So, whereas the Chinese average citizen is saving 40%. Okay, that's how they're going to lure people to those two cities. And if you come in making more money than the average Chinese citizen, while you're going to be saving just as well as they are, okay, and living just as easily as they are, and that's the difference. Okay, let's get to one more point of this article. Looking at the ups and downs of the Chinese and U.S. economies once again proves the validity of the Austrian business cycle theory. Key insights: that savings are necessary in laying the foundation of economic growth, and the Keynesian stimulus spending only worsens recessions. Whether the Chinese economy can truly surpass that of the U.S. will depend on the Chinese people's ability to value their virtue of saving and counter the spend your way to prosperity propaganda. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that you're enjoying this series. And again, I want to be absolutely clear that the base of this video is out there. The Chinese have $22 trillion in savings. That does not include their investments or 401k styles of also accumulating wealth, okay? I want you to understand that, 22 trillion. In other words, if they were to have a crisis over there, the Chinese people, with only 1/3 of their savings, could pay their national debt. Do you understand that? The Americans, on the other hand, we don't. So when they do a bail-in in America, they're taking your 401ks and they're going to seize those. If they were to do a bail-in in China, it would only be 30% of the people's savings. Do you understand that? The difference. Anybody who thinks the U.S. economy is somehow better fundamentally than the Chinese economy should just take a look at the cost of living of the people and the savings rates of the people. And then you will realize to make such a statement is irrational. I hope you enjoy this series. I hope that I'm bringing some light into your lives about the economic status of the world and of America. And I hope that somehow you will start doing your own research and understanding and posting your own videos on all of this information. Be well, be smart, be wise, buy real assets, because eventually this whole thing is going to implode, and you know it. Jim out.